Hi, welcome. I am Fran Burwell, a distinguished fellow here at the Atlantic Council, and I'm welcome everyone today to our panel discussion on the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, or TTC. With our partners at Digital Europe, we've pulled together a great panel to discuss the upcoming meeting in Paris, which will be held on May 16th, just a couple of weeks away. Before introducing our panelists, I want to make just a few points. First, I think that the TTC is really a very innovative mechanism in the management of US-EU relations. We have had councils, dialogues, all sorts of things before. And this one, though, is unusual in that we have very, very high-level political buy-in. The Secretaries of State, Commerce, the US Trade Representative, and 2 Executive Vice Presidents from the European Commission. We also have 10 serious working groups on very specific topics, all with mandates to move forward in analyzing a lot of different issues, as they bring together staffs from across the US departments as well as the Commission Director Generals. But dialogues like this have failed before. In fact, the history of US-EU partnership has a lot of such failed dialogues. Usually the top people just lose interest, or the political context changes, and the dialogue is no longer relevant. The TTC, I think the answer is out on this at this point. I think we're very much looking forward to what our speakers are going to say about this. The political context, particularly the international political context, has very much changed since the Pittsburgh meeting in September. That was certainly a successful meeting because everyone got together and had a good time and figured out what they wanted to do, but there were no deliverables, and there shouldn't have been on the first meeting. We're now heading to the second meeting, and that's when the deliverables are going to be important. We have higher expectations now, and the challenge is whether the TTC will meet it. I think also the stakes are very high in the larger relationship. Both the US and the EU are reshaping their visions of how their economies will work in terms of more of a focus on industrial policy and a reshoring of strategic industries. The EU has basically a tsunami wave of regulation underway on a number of things, from sustainability to digital policy, and I think we're still trying to figure out how the TTC works with all of that. But more than that, we now have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this has made clear the importance both of our partnership, which we have seen with an unprecedented level of cooperation on export controls and sanctions, but it's not yet clear what the role is of the TTC vis-a-vis what is really now the core issue of the US-EU partnership. So let me introduce our speakers. First up, we have Ambassador Stavros Lambernitas. He's been ambassador of the EU in Washington since March 2019. And he previously served as the EU Special Representative for Human Rights. He's also been the Foreign Minister of Greece and an MEP. And he's a former trade lawyer. Ruth Berry, who is Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Information and Communications Policy in the very, very new Bureau for Cyberspace and Digital Policy at the State Department. This is actually a return engagement for her because she worked at the office which was the predecessor of that bureau. But in between, she has been the Director of Digital Technology Policy at the White House on the National Security Council staff. And then Cecilia Bonfeld-Dahl, who is Director General of Digital Europe, the most influential voice of the digital technology industry in Europe today, with more than 36,000 companies as members. She is on the board of Gaia X, the European Cloud program, and the European Commission's Industrial Forum, as well as on high-level groups at NATO and at ENISA, which is the European Cybersecurity Agency. So welcome to everybody. I'm going to start with Ambassador Lambernitas. The TTC was originally an EU proposal, which the Americans accepted, with modifications, of course. So what are your views on its accomplishments to date, given the Pittsburgh meeting? And what are your expectations for the meeting in a couple of weeks? Also, how do you place the TTC in the larger parameters of the relationship? I know there's some who say that it's just a box-ticking exercise. We go to the TTC and then we can say we've talked to the Europeans. How do you see that?
Well, look, I mean, you are right to say that we proposed the Trade Technology Council as European Union. We did so when we presented to the U.S. administration a broader proposal on how to have a positive agenda in the relationship. We had gone through a few turbulent years, as you remember. Mm-hmm. And we certainly wanted to make sure that the TTC is not the place where hope goes to die, because the risk was certainly there. You have 10 working groups, it can become a chat shop, and at the end of the day, nothing happens. And we have achieved this. It is not the place that hope goes to die. In fact, it's the place where already you have a lot of positive cooperation. And the reason is, in my view, twofold. Oh, it might be manifold, but let's just say two things. So the first thing is the very high political engagement that is taking place, as you described, at the highest level, that is keeping not simply the ability for decisions to be taken immediately, as opposed to having something burble up and get to some principals who don't know what's happening. And then the fact that the working groups are staffed by truly high-level civil servants who are, or even politicians who are capable to focus on the minutiae and from that come up to some specific. Specific number one, export controls. How do you think it happened that we managed, after Russia invaded Ukraine, in the first couple of days to impose, Americans and Europeans together, export controls on some of the highest tech, whether semiconductors or dual-use technologies, without a glitch in our agreeing to do so and in identifying the products? It is, I submit to you, because the Trade Technology Council, since its first meeting in Pittsburgh, did not die, engaged in very deep dives in export control, which is one of the working groups.
One of the working groups, right.
And ended up getting the principals know each other personally. I was at Madeleine Albright's very, very touching and poignant memorial service. And President Biden spoke there about Madeleine Albright, and he said at some point that his view, which Madeleine so personified, was that all foreign policy is personal relations. And I submit to you that's exactly what we have seen work as well in this area. People know, trust, like each other, and that is not something that is inconsequential. It is, in fact, fundamental. Second, looking at semiconductors. Now, during COVID, we saw semiconductor supply chains collapse, and the car industry, so many other industries facing those issues. We decided back in Pittsburgh that we're going to be looking at transparency of those supply chains, exchanging information among ourselves and identifying potential crises in the future, not just for semiconductors, but for many other critical materials that both you and we in Europe have identified more or less the same areas that are particularly sensitive. And then we're going beyond this to look at how we will be investing in Europe and you in the States when it comes to chips. You have your CHIPS Act that eventually will probably, get voted in Congress. We have our own CHIPS Act. That's close to $50 billion in both directions. And the question is, how do we use that money to incentivize our industry to be able to be much less reliant on producing chips on others? Yeah, you want to?
Right.
Yeah.
But let me just, I think it's important not only about how to be less reliant on others, but how to deconflict if we're both providing money for the semiconductor.
Well, this is precisely what we're discussing. So so this is exactly what I was about to say. We're also looking at ensuring that we do not make the mistake either of too excessively doing the same thing,
right,
but also to avoid a subsidy race. which is going to be the kind of thing that industry would love to see, frankly, because then they can go around and try to shop,
Right.
the best jurisdiction. So when Americans and Europeans are going to sit down, or already sitting down, discussing those things, they will come up with solutions that I think you will see already in May, right? And finally, look, there are big things such as disinformation. We're setting up in this Trade Technology Council a subgroup, a crisis subgroup on disinformation, also to understand how it's spread and how it is that we can better be prepared to deal with it, including now with Russia's invasion. Friends, Russia's invasion has many disinformation elements to it, but I am particularly concerned about things such as food security. Russia is intentionally targeting now for the past 2 months wheat silos, ports that export wheat, all those things, tractors, intentionally trying to make sure that Ukraine cannot produce and export wheat to dozens of countries around the world, Africa, elsewhere, that rely extensively on it. And they're going around the world at the same time claiming that it is our sanctions against their aggression that are the cause for this food shortage. This kind of stuff cannot be left unanswered. And unless we understand how the internet works, how the spread of disinformation works, how we as Americans and Europeans can counter it more effectively, we will be chasing after development. So that's another thing.
Thanks. Let me turn to Ruth now. So Ruth, we have now seen the establishment of this new bureau. And can you say a few things about why and what its role is vis-a-vis the TTC? But it strikes me also that this issue that has just been raised of disinformation, without going all the way down that path, because that's a huge subject, but are you seeing some new things that the US government might be doing that are about the internet and keeping that? What are you looking at there, and how does the Bureau relate to that?
Thank you. Thanks, Fran, for inviting me to join this panel, and it's a pleasure to be here alongside Ambassador Lambernitas and General Director Bonfield-Dahl. So the establishment of the Cyberspace and Digital Policy Bureau is a key piece of Secretary Blinken's plans to build a State Department to meet and win the technology challenges of the 21st century. For the Biden-Harris administration, technology issues are not a standalone diplomatic issue. Both cyber, technology, and digital economy diplomacy are part and parcel of everything that we do. And as Secretary Blinken noted, our task is to put forth and carry out a compelling vision for how to use technology and live our digital lives in a way that serves our people, protects our interests, and upholds our democratic values. And the new CDP Bureau is designed, Cyberspace and Digital Policy Bureau, to really bring together and create a single place for coordinating across the national security, cybersecurity, and digital economy policy, ICT policy, and also the human rights issues. So we have the Office of International Cybersecurity, we have the Office of International Communications and Information Policy, which is the office that I head up, and we have a digital freedom unit as well. And so this bureau is currently led by our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Jennifer Bacchus, who is our senior bureau official until such time as we've nominated and confirmed an ambassador at large. And as I said, this new bureau brings together all these different aspects to the technology and digital space and ensures that we have an integrated approach and are able to lead in engagements with international partners on these issues. And across other units within the State Department who have related pieces. With the Trade and Technology Council, this bureau is also very involved in that. We represent for the State Department on Working Group 1 on standards, including the sub-working group on AI. We also lead the Security and Competitiveness of Information and Communications Technology, which is Working Group 4. And we lead for the department on Working Group 5, which is Data Governance and Technology Platforms. And we also engage, and this gets to your point about misinformation and disinformation, with Working Group 6 and on other parts of that. Right. And I think the message of transatlantic unity really that has been engendered under the TTC and built has bled into other parts of the transatlantic relationship, even ones where it may not be specifically part of the TTC. And I think this spirit of cooperation and trust helped lead to a resolution of the negotiations on a transatlantic data privacy framework, as well as the ambassador said, working in lockstep to impose severe coordinated costs and consequences and sanctions against Russia in this war, in their invasion of Ukraine. And I think I would like to echo something the ambassador said that I really think is true, and I really saw firsthand, particularly at the National Security Council, is the act of bringing together dedicated and senior level career officials across the US and the European Union really create the opportunity for long-term cooperation and trust. And it's about sort of resolving maybe some long-standing issues or disagreements between the US and Europe, but then also builds the foundation to also be able to look forward at future challenges. And I think the areas of misinformation and disinformation are one of those areas where the entire world is grappling with how to address these issues. And I think you have to work through multilateral fora to really think about them.
Right. Cecilia, let me turn to you now as the business person here on the panel. The TTC deals with some really nitty-gritty issues and issues that make a lot of difference to business, that matter a lot, whether it's AI or green tech or export controls and investment screening. What are you looking for in the May meeting as someone who represents businesses? We've had a lot of talk, and I think I don't want to degrade it, I'm not using that just to say just talk, about good feelings and cooperation, and I salute the TTC's efforts to date to do that. I think it's given US and European officials permission to go forward and cooperate even when they don't have specific things. But how does that work for business? And what are your expectations, what are your needs and requirements for the TTC to see it as a success?
I mean, first of all, I think it's already been a success. So we heard about some of the achievements, even though the Privacy Shield was not directly included in the TTC. There is no doubt that it has been instrumental in actually reaching what we hope to be a sustainable solution on the Privacy Shield. And I think that's a great sign of trust between the two parties. And export controls already been a great success. And I think we are seeing also alignment on how to handle misinformation, how to handle the future of the internet. And I know that the US is coming out now, the administration is coming out with a new declaration. So I think it's already bearing fruit. I mean, and industry, I think we have really been heard. We came out with 10 recommendations on what to work in with the new US administration quite early in 2021. And we see 9 of those reflected directly in the groups. Okay. Does that mean that we don't have iterative new things that we need to focus on? Absolutely not. I mean, the Ukraine crisis has made this absolutely crucial, this dialogue on emerging technologies. And I think it's very clear to anybody who should have been in doubt now that how we handle emerging technologies is not only a question of growth, it is also a question of growth and investment, but it is also a question of national security now. So I'm really glad to hear that our voices are also being heard on crisis management. We see in the Ukrainian war all of a sudden supply of critical infrastructure, so digital infrastructure for communication, both for saving refugees and for, of course, internal communication in Ukraine is becoming crucial. And spare parts for those critical infrastructures are really needed from the Ukrainians. So that's just another area on top of chips and other things. And this early warning system is really one of the things that we hope to see in May being confirmed, that there will be an early warning system both on cybersecurity threats, on shortage of supply and other dangers of emerging technologies. When that is said, of course, there is also an investment aspect. There is no doubt that there are other places on in the world where the investment aspect in scale-ups on dual-use technologies has been a great focus of them for the last 15 years. And I think it's crucial that US and EU really looks at how can we create an investment environment in Europe, especially in, I would say, Eastern Europe, but not only limited to, that really enhances the development and adoption of digital technologies that are also based on, I would say, the democratic world's investments. And we've seen that with the NATO now, just to add another component on, that they have launched the Diana program and the NATO Investment Fund. We see now increasingly investment in technologies on both sides, but that is absolutely a crucial element also to discuss in the TTC. Then, of course, on the what you call the nitty-gritty parts, I mean, EU is really launching a lot of regulation and running ahead on this. But I think we have also seen a very kind of sensible way to really say, for example, AI, we take a risk-based approach. We are really looking at where are the dangers, and we are coordinate with the US on this. Right. In the end, it will end up as standardization work, so companies can comply with specific standards on cybersecurity, on artificial intelligence, etc. But the alignment and understanding on that has to be EU-US based. If we look at our SMEs in Europe, we have 94% of them transferring data back and forward from EU to US, and we have huge investments. So it's absolutely crucial that we get an environment where there is a common ground on standards, a common ground on understanding of principles, even an alignment on regulation, even though I think we'll always have more regulation in EU than we will in US, and an alignment on that, but not least also an awareness that the investments in quantum computing, in AI for cybersecurity, and these things, they will set a standard on who is using what, and can we actually protect ourselves in cases like we've just seen Portugal being really hit by cybersecurity yesterday and today. You know, how do we actually have a early warning system and a sharing of vulnerabilities and common standards in what we do here? So a lot to talk about, but definitely AI, cybersecurity, emerging technologies, both seen from a regulatory standpoint, but also seen from an investment standpoint.
And a lot, frankly, you know, Fran, that we are talking about already. So you take your fundamental question, the new regulations we're coming out with. The fact of the matter is, you know, Margrethe Vestager, the executive vice president for these issues, has been in this country twice in the past 3 months. Meeting with industry, meeting with the administration, meeting with civil society, meeting with Congress. And for better or for worse, there are many leading members of Congress who are entirely aligned with identifying the same problems we have identified on these issues. Very often what we get is a reply that says, please tell us more of what you did, how you did it, because we think that what you are doing is actually correct. We have to do the same. It may be very difficult in Congress to actually pass any regulation, but the fact of the matter is, we're not really being faced with shouting and criticism, but we are being faced with a desire to work more closely together, which is precisely why our leaders from Europe are coming here, to ensure that this cooperation can take place.
Let me put a sharper point on that, though, because Celia mentioned how many SMEs are, the high percentage of SMEs who are shipping data back and forth. We have some proposals like the Data Act, where it's not clear what the conditions will be to allow international transfer of data. Now, it's a proposal at this point. It still has to go through the legislative, so it's not set in stone, but we know something like it is coming. We've also seen at the member state level some efforts to restrict ownership of those companies that are providing cloud services to government entities, not in the private sector. And that is something, though, that may come up in the EU's cloud certification process. I take it, I mean, I hear the good words about moving together, but the EU is moving fast.
And that is a bad thing because you are moving slow. Is that what you're implying?
Well,
sorry, I'm
but
not gonna
are
buy
there
this.
ways-
Listen to me, Fran, I'm not going to buy this. I've had enough of this.
Okay.
Honestly, I've heard a lot about this. We're working tremendously closely. When we were doing the GDPR a few years back, there were a lot of people who were, predicting the end of innovation, the end of the internet. And in fact, what happened in the end of the day is that today we have companies who are competing on the basis of who is providing more privacy to their customers. Because this is not just simply some European regulator deciding to do something crazy. It is a demand of the market where more than 6% of all trade in the next few years is going to, in fact, be digital. A demand of the market to ensure that consumers can feel confident when they use the internet, that their data will not be misused or abused or collected. And so, sometimes being, a force for good, as the EU has been in this case, is actually not a bad thing, including when it comes to American, thinking. Now, the issue you mentioned about cloud services, this is something that indeed has been raised.
Yeah.
And this is something that is going to be discussed in the Trade and Technology Council. Concerns on the European side, sometimes on Buy America, including on digital
absolutely.
infrastructure, you can bet you will also be discussed. Trade and Technology Council is not the end of potential disagreements on some issues.
Yeah.
It is the fact that instead of fighting about them and sitting and shouting about them, we, the two biggest economies and innovators in the world, Americans and Europeans, are sitting down to find joint ways to move ahead with them. And the role of industry or companies is hugely important to us. I mean, we have had, I don't know how many consultations with, well, not just you, Cecilia, but with so many others, coming to how it is that we should structure this TTC. We have taken on board so many of those proposals. So this is not a bunch of regulators, Americans or Europeans, sitting and deciding for the rest of the world. No. It is talking with everyone who has a direct stake to make sure that we, democracies, can come out ahead when all these technologies are making decisions in our lives that could undermine democracy itself. There are countries around the world that are using artificial intelligence to repress. Unless democracies manage to find a way, including through a TTC, to set the standards for this AI, we will be in real trouble in a few years' time. And unless we bake those human rights standards in our technology and bring it to the rest of the world, well, good luck to us. It's not going to be a nice world we're going to be living in.
So let me just briefly, I want to ask Ruth, bring in the US side here, about her ambitions for the TTC in a couple of weeks, and whether it does create this discussion place, this place where you can go and talk about the issues. And of course, the issue that everyone wants to know is, are we likely to see a data transfer as an actual agreement by the TTC, or have you seen it push forward because of the TTC? And after that, we're going to start going to the audience for questions after one more remark. So Ruth.
Thank you. The U.S. and Europe, and the Biden administration and many members of Congress, I think, have similar views of the importance of, addressing some of the challenges that we face by the digital technology or large platforms. We don't always necessarily agree on the solutions, and we don't have the same sort of political and legal systems that would enable sort of a carbon copy approach to addressing these challenges. But I think when we come from a place of having a shared understanding and agreement about the challenges we want to address, that creates a lot of space for us to talk about how we do that. We don't always agree with the European approach to doing that, and we are very frank, as countries should be, with their friends and allies. And often that happens behind closed doors, because that's where you can truly have this free exchange. And I can say, being part of the working groups that specifically address these issues, we really do have that very frank exchange between the US and Europe on that. And I think, like I said, I think part of it is, while we don't discuss or negotiate specific legislative proposals on either side of the Atlantic, as we think about these issues, both that are on the table today, but also ones that come on the table in the future, this is a very good format to do that, regardless of whether or not we always agree. On the transatlantic data, sorry, the acronym just came out, but the new, the transatlantic data transfer agreement, this is an issue, obviously, I'm very close to. I helped lead these negotiations over the past year. And, the Europeans are very tough negotiators. This was not, this was hard fought to get to this point. And we feel very comfortable that we came up with an agreement that ensures strong privacy protections while still enabling transatlantic data flows and the important economic growth and innovation that are enabled by that. We announced an agreement in principle, and now that's going through the work of being translated into legal text. But just to be clear, like an agreement in principle consists of, several dozen pages of heavily negotiated text. So this was not merely a political push to get something done.
Okay.
This was something that the details had been negotiated with over the past year, and we reached a point where we had agreement between the U.S. and Europe on a way forward that would achieve our objectives and withstand a court of justice challenge. So I'm very confident. I hate to put timelines on legal text. The number of lawyers that have to review these on both sides of the Atlantic are pretty staggering. But I think in the coming months, I'm very confident that durable solution will be in place. And then just briefly to touch on another area of close U.S. and Europe cooperation that Cecilia mentioned is the launch of the Declaration for the Future of the Internet, which will be launched tomorrow. And this is bringing together dozens of countries, including the European Commission and member states, around a vision for the future of the internet that acknowledges that the internet has enabled incredible human progress and economic growth and individual empowerment, but also is facing some threats and challenges to this vision of an open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet from countries like China and countries like Russia. We've seen a number of negative and concerning trends like censorship, misinformation, internet shutdowns, election interference. And so this is a political commitment by dozens of countries that really the U.S. and the Commission worked very closely on, along with other partners over the past 8 months, to really put forth an affirmative vision of how governments and partners will behave with respect to the internet and the digital space. And I think this sort of cooperation, while not linked to the TTC, is also enabled by such a close relationship between the US and Europe on these other issues.
Celia, very briefly, do you think that there's enough stakeholder engagement with the TTC right now, or are you looking for more?
I would say that, first of all, it's a success.
It does,
and it's fabulous that it happened. It was an idea, and now it's coming true, and it's great. And I think it will bring us a lot of results. I don't think it's a talking shop, and we'll keep on pushing for it not to be a talking shop. When that is said, I would say just mention one, maybe two things. First, skills. There needs to be a discussion of critical skills for some of the areas that will determine whether we are kind of the winning world is democratic or not.
Right.
Just here in the States, I think there is 600,000 cybersecurity specialists missing, 300,000 in Europe. And if I go to AI and one of the other areas, and this is not only about, industry, do we have the skills? It is also about, again, security. So skills needs to be much more central to the discussions, because it's not only about growth, it's about much more than that. Second, I would say that industry engagement, yes, there's a lot of industry engagement, but we're not a part of the official groups, and it could be discussed whether at least direct interactions in the group, maybe not all the time, but really bringing the knowledge. I mean, the majority of innovations actually comes out of industry and tech today. So there lies a lot of knowledge on how to do standards, how to innovate in tech, even how to regulate in tech, that can actually come out of private sectors. So we don't have a choice of this separation of sectors that we have today. In the future, I think the strongest party will win on tech, and all the knowledge, a lot of the knowledge is actually found in industry. So I think we would benefit for an extended version of the current stakeholder engagement.
Right. So that's actually a great segue, because I'm delighted to say that we're now going to have a comment by Christian Sylvain Bouchoy, who is a member of the European Parliament but most importantly, he is the chair of the Industry, Research and Energy Committee in the Parliament, otherwise known as ITRA, which is one of the key parliaments. There has been some discussion of parliamentary and congressional interaction with the TTC. To date, it's been mostly talk, but Chairman Bushoi, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Parliament's expectations for the TTC.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here and to see our excellent ambassador to US, and also to see the Director General of Digital Europe being present in Washington. And of course, I followed the very interesting discussion. European Parliament have great expectations and gives a strong political support to the TTC. Of course, it is our expectation to see a revigorated trade policy, to grow our bilateral trade and investment relations, to strengthen our global cooperation on technology, digital and supply chains, and also, of course, to reduce trade barriers, to develop compatible standards, international standards on emerging technologies, and ensure critical chain supply chain security, because this became a very important issue in the context of COVID and now the illegal war of Russia against Ukraine. For the committee that I'm chairing, ITRE committee, TTC is also extremely important, as it touches several aspects and policies in the ITRE, Industry, Research and Energy Committee remit. We are extremely interested and would like to be involved in the artificial intelligence and data discussions, emerging technologies, also research, as Horizon Europe is extremely important for European Union, and research cooperation could be extremely beneficial. ICTs, cybersecurity, energy transition, of course promoting SME access and the use of digital tools. European Parliament is not participating officially directly, of course, in the discussion, but to establish a task force, let's say like this, in the European Parliament, several committee chairs, the chair of EU-US delegation, chair of INTA, the chair of ITRE committee, some other chair of AFET, of course, and some other colleagues which are very much involved in this. We are in a constant dialogue with European Commission representatives, and we give our input and we tell our expectations, but also our suggestions to this. I was also invited in mid-May in France to the next meeting as chairman of ITRE committee to observe and to be there. So the Parliament is strongly supporting this and is willing to contribute and to support European Commission to have the best deal with a win-win final outcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I want to now turn to the audience and see if we have some questions here. I hope we do. We have a great panel here. So if you could indicate, see anything there? Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the panel here, and I'm going to ask Ruth Stoff, what is your view on the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the TTC? I mean, the TTC was not set up to deal with this kind of issue. And what are the differences that you find? And you were in the NSC when all of a sudden the same people who were working on the TTC were in the middle of sanctions and export controls. Is that accurate?
That certainly is accurate. Yeah. I mean, I think Ambassador Lambernitas put this well when he said that, you know, this cooperation on export controls really paid dividends when the US and Europe were able to operate in lockstep following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think that, you know, the TTC is incredibly important as a forum to engage on these issues, but there are lots of issues in the US-European relationship when it comes to matters of national security that don't fall within the TTC. So in many ways, I don't see it as zero-sum, but I do think that this invasion added a lot of urgency to some of these issues that we're seeing, such as that do fall within the TTC, such as export controls, such as this working on misinformation and disinformation. So I think it adds some urgency and necessity to this, and I think is a good example of cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Stavros, what do you, Ambassador Lambernitas, what do you see?
Stavros is good. Stavros is
what,
good. I prefer.
What do you see as the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the TTC?
Well, I fully agree with Ruth. Look, we are focusing on export controls much more now.
Yeah.
And the lessons we learned from the way we're reacting to Russia are also going to be important as we focus at the TTC more broadly on export controls as an issue around the world. Supply chain resilience was always a big issue in the TTC, but it's bigger now because after Russia's invasion, we see we certainly see more supply chain interruptions and more need to be able to be more resilient ourselves. Cybersecurity and protecting our physical infrastructure is a very big deal, and Russia has not yet cyber attacked in any major way, but it is precisely the kind of issue that we are already mapping and being ready for, including our responses if it decides to do something as foolish as that. Fran, more important, if you like, an umbrella issue, is indeed the values issue. So when we look at Russia's attack, it's not just that it's trying to literally kill Ukrainians on the ground and doing this, simple people on a daily basis. It is trying to rip apart the international legal order, the values that the international community as a whole set up after World War II in order to be able to instead make might right as opposed to international law right, in order to instead use the internet tools that we have in place to misinform their own population, repress opposition, do all those things that we have discovered technology, if used by the wrong people for the wrong purposes, can achieve quite effectively. And so when at the TTC we are discussing in different working groups those issues, it is not just simply us having a theoretical values discussion. It is a hardcore foreign policy discussion, geostrategic discussion about how to ensure that this internet world that we're entering is not one that people like Putin would desire to have out there.
Cecilia, let me follow up with you on some of the remarks you made earlier about emerging technologies, but particularly cyber, because you are on the ANISA, some of the ANISA advisory boards. When you look at the experience of the war in Ukraine, where we haven't seen huge cyber attacks, at least successful ones, we don't know what's going on underneath. But how do you see that going forward in terms of what should we be doing? What role can an institution like the TTC play, or a mechanism like the TTC? And how does this fit into business calculations? I mean, clearly you're representing business when you're on these committees. So, I mean, business pays the cost, both if there's a cyber attack, but also the cost of compliance with additional standards and other safeguards that we might use, certifications or whatever. How do you see that moving forward? How can we keep the US and the EU on more or less an even playing field? And will this be, will cybersecurity be more of a priority in the TTC than was envisioned at the beginning?
I certainly do hope so. No, so I think you're touching on two things. You're touching about regulatory burden,
right,
certifications, da-da-da. Well, this is exactly what the TTC is for, looking at those standards, looking at those certifications, and trying to find a harmonized or at least aligned framework for that, and using international standards as a base of this. So I think that is the right course of direction. Then if we talk about governance, we heard that the ambassador just tell us that we're looking at a crisis response. That crisis response also needs to be expanded to cybersecurity. Right now, it is a state competence, it's a national competence. We do not have a chain of command with our like-minded, of course we have NATO, and it's up for discussion, how do we make sure that we have a crisis response with our like-minded partners on cybersecurity? And how do we have common investment in something like quantum computing, which is absolutely crucial for cybersecurity in the future? And how do we have investment in artificial intelligence for cybersecurity, which is also playing a major role in this? How do we protect infrastructures, etc.? So I would say, well, common standards is one, investments is another, and the governance part of it is really deriving from the crisis in Ukraine becoming extremely much more central. How do we govern that? And there, even private sector, so just remember, private sector is not only about money. I mean, it's also about, if we look at Ukraine, all the early warnings, both on troop movements and on cybersecurity attacks, was done by private sector. Because we sometimes actually see these way before the public sector. And I mean, we're all people and we all want to do the right thing. This is also why you've seen businesses at a speed like never before pulling out of Russia and really supporting Ukraine by all means. So in these areas, it's not about what sector you're in. It's also about having a crisis response in cybersecurity that is united, where we share vulnerabilities, where we share information, and we're able to do so before it goes wrong. So yeah, there is plenty of things to discuss, not only standard, but really also the governance of it.
So, I mean, you bring up an interesting point about being prepared with our other partners, not just the US and the EU. And so I wanted to go to Ruth, because we have very strong relations, as does the EU, with other partners. And the British have clearly been integral to the conversations about Ukraine, but also Australia, Japan. We've seen huge numbers, a broad array of countries jumping on board with sanctions and export controls. Does the TTC have a place for coordinating or reaching out to like-minded countries on certain things? Is the TTC a place where US-EU starts to work together and then tries to multilateralize it as well? Or are there certain issues in the TTC that works for and certain others that it doesn't?
So I can speak from the US perspective. We've taken sort of what we've described as a modular approach to engaging our international partners on these really critical emerging technology issues, whether that's working through the Quad with Australia, India, and Japan, or through the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, or other sort of existing international fora, G7, OECD, et cetera. Because these issues are common to facing countries and democracies around the world, and there's no one forum. They can't be limited to simply one forum or grouping of international countries. I think with the TTC, absolutely, I think a great vision and aspiration is, as the US and Europe come together on shared values and approaches to some of these global issues, that we could also channel that into working together with third countries. I think one potential area of cooperation is in secure digital connectivity in third countries, and thinking about how we can work together on international financing for connectivity and closing the digital divide. So I think that's just one example, but absolutely, as the US and Europe converge on a lot, particularly on a lot of these values or supply chains or other issues, thinking about how we engage with third countries is very important.
Would the EU chime in on that?
Oh, absolutely, fully agree. And I think that international financial connectivity and identifying projects around the world that we think are important is going to be something you will see being discussed this May.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The European Commission President von der Leyen was just in India.
Oh, yeah.
She announced with her Indian counterparts that we will be, as Europeans, launching a TTC type of discussion with India as well, ensuring that we can, in fact, move our discussion with the United States to a broader international audience of countries that are important to be in the same boat of understanding where we're trying to take it. So you will see a lot of that.
Good. And now we're going to go to our audience. Would you please identify yourself and stand?
It's on? Okay, thank you. Carolina Costa. I'm with Relics, UK-based data analytics multinational. Thank you so much for this wonderful debate. I'm part of our global government relations team, and I'm based here in DC. So I just want to bring the discussion a little bit back to the private sector. So as a transnational company, what can we be doing to be working more closely with the EU and the US as the negotiations take place to ensure that we're collaborating as much as we can to the various work streams, and especially on things like cybersecurity, digital trade, etc. We play in that field directly, so appreciate hearing the insights on that. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And so this is about stakeholder engagement and how can, particularly I think, individual companies contribute to the discussion. I mean, Cecilia, you had a lot of input in the beginning. You represent 36,000 companies. So we do have, I know, other companies that are large and have big government affairs shops that have been able to put things in. But maybe Ruth and Stavros, you could say something about.
Maybe if I can make one comment. Actually, in this room today are 5 scale-ups, European, all doing great things from health, cancer research with AI, EID through facial recognition, road administration, detecting vulnerabilities, supply chain tracking of minerals, etc. So we actually take this. I mean, we brought, I would say, European scale-ups with the wish to really also make transatlantic business. And we'll continue to do so, and of course also our larger companies. So it's actually not only the bigger ones who have an effect. We have a huge community that we actually talk to on daily basis, where we survey, we take their input, and we bring them to the US also. So,
right. But I think there's also an appetite by companies to engage directly. And I'm just wondering how best, I know the Commerce Department has a website, but can you say how you all see stakeholder engagement developing more broadly?
Sure.
Briefly?
So yeah, the Department of Commerce, there are mailboxes set up for each of the TTC working groups where anyone is welcome to contact with ideas. But I think, the working groups cover an incredibly vast array of issues, and so it's not one size fits all, but I can say that there's a commitment both at the political level of the TTC, and you'll see at the ministerial level, or at the minister meetings, there is stakeholder engagement as a robust portion of that, as it was during the first ministerial. But each individual working group has its own stakeholder engagement processes and plans, and thinking specifically about small and medium enterprises and startups, there's an entire working group devoted to helping SMEs take advantage of technology and expand their businesses across the Atlantic. And they've done quite a number of work and listening sessions with industry on both sides of the Atlantic. Supply chains looking at critical minerals, that's a different set of stakeholders in industry, or climate and clean tech. And so there is a lot of outreach ongoing. I mean, I think from a very tactical sense, the easiest way to get in hold of it, at least on the US side, is to send an email. But it is certainly a big priority for all of the working groups and at the political level.
Briefly,
Yes, the same
Stavros.
exactly for us.
Yeah.
Fran, I mean, absolutely there's a website dedicated one, and one that thousands of companies have visited up to now successfully. But the 10 working groups, the heads of them in Brussels, are affirmatively reaching out and having specialized meetings with industry and trade associations and others to ensure that at every step we are able to get input. Now, not everyone is in there, obviously, and if you were to ask me the details of how exactly companies are selected, I just don't know. But I pretty much know that there's an effort to make this as representative as possible. So it's a very, very good point, and one that keeps us up as we're looking into this, because precisely what Cecilia mentioned, for this to work, it has to work for our companies, our industries.
Right.
It has to work for our governments when it comes to major security issues and concerns that could require regulation. But it also fundamentally has to work for our industries.
So we have one more question and 5 minutes. So, Susan Ness?
Okay, thank you. I'm Susan Ness. I'm affiliated both with the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as the German Marshall Fund. Very great discussion this afternoon and a fabulous job in bringing skillfully to fruition the Digital Services Act. So congratulations on on that. There are provisions within the DSA that anticipate engagement with stakeholders in the development of specific codes of conduct, for example, and other things. I agree with the ambassador. There's no reason to be waiting for the United States to get its regulatory act together. But we could very well work together with stakeholders on very specific requirements, such as, for example, vetting researchers and protocols for access for platform data, or vetting and protocols for auditors to examine algorithms and the like. These things, it wouldn't make any sense to have one set of systems in the United States, another set of systems for Europe. So my question is,
Yes.
how do we do that? And is the TTC a
Wait,
good
let me,
vehicle?
1 second. So this is, because the recording.
Yes.
How do we work together now that the DSA is more or less done, officially done? How do we work together to make sure that we can collaborate in the absence of U.S. legislative initiatives, but to make sure that the nuts and bolts work together?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and both the DSA and the DMA, as you very correctly pointed out, are not done and dusted. There's going to be a lot of work to put the details to many of those bones. Now, on that work, my encouragement always to industry, including U.S. companies, is focus on those kinds of details, because the European Commission, the European Union is entirely open in discussing with stakeholders, as it has in the past, how to get this right. Fran, we came out, among other things, with our Artificial Intelligence Act. It's not getting as much attention as DSA, DMA, but it is setting the rules of the road for artificial intelligence. Getting there, we had an artificial intelligence working party, an experts group. Do you know who was in that group? There were about 40 interlocutors in total. Google was in there. Microsoft was in there. We are affirmatively, as Europeans, inviting not just European companies, but American companies and other critical companies around the world to make sure that when we are discussing those issues, we have everyone's view. We may not always agree in the end on everything, but we absolutely do not intend to be putting things out there without having consulted everyone on both sides of the Atlantic.
Right. So let me do one thing in the last minute that we have, and that is I'm going to ask each of you for one sentence on what you want to see from the TTC next in a couple of weeks, in mid-May. What would be top of your wish list? And we're going to go in reverse order of go. Celia, Ruth, Stavros.
All right.
I would like to see an emergency and crisis response function that focuses at cybersecurity, supply chain resilience, and in general, digital resilience, misinformation.
Great. Ruth.
I would like to see a clear articulation of what these working groups have accomplished in cooperation to date, as well as some forward-looking opportunities for things that we can continue our work on over the coming year.
Good. Stavros.
I would like to see anything that would get Fran Burwell say, you know what, this actually may be working. So this is going to be my goal the next 2 weeks, to see if I can achieve that. And if I can, boy, that's going to be a huge success.
Well, it's great to know that I hold the success of the TTC in my hands. Thank you very much. But thank you especially to our panelists. I think we've had a great group here, and they've been very, I think, frank, but also positive and imaginative in thinking about the future of the TTC and US-EU digital tech policy. And so I think that's great. And thank you to the audience and to the chairman of the ITRA committee. Wonderful to have the European Parliament represented here. And thanks to all of you in the audience. Again, thanks very much for joining us.